Welcome to this episode of Talent Trailblazers. I'm Gautam Sinha, your host, CEO of Cbrex. I have a very special guest today on the show, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation. A very close friend of mine, his name is Jess Larsen. And Jess is like, it's difficult to put Jess in a box, right? But I'm going to attempt to make some kind of an introduction. So, Jess is a person who started his career in finance, but is an artist by training, right? And when I'm saying artist, I'm talking about just went to an art school, right? Then after post dabbling in finance, now he's doing various things as an entrepreneur. But one of the things that Jess does very well is hosting podcasts, and he's done more than 800 episodes of the Jess Larsen Show, which if you guys have not heard, you must, right? And we're going to spend the next 35 to 40 minutes talking about various experiences that Jess has had and the learnings that he has got, and hopefully, some learnings that every listener on this podcast will get. So, welcome to the show, Jess.
Gautam, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, Jess, I'm going to get right into it. You you've dabbled in several things, right? One thing which I wanted to start with was that a person like you or other people, who are interested in various things, right? They don't have one particular interest. How do you ensure that, you know, what you do it well? Because the problem with having varied interests is that you dabble in so many things that, you maybe do 10 or 15% of each, and you never get beyond like 70, 80, 100. So how do you make sure that even though you have varied interests, right? If you're attempting to do something, you do it to completion and you give it your best shot.
Yeah, I'd say that's a lifelong struggle. It's definitely been a thing that's kept me from the results I could have had is by doing too many things at once. The thing that have found the most helpful is a book by a billionaire who built the largest real estate agency in the world called Keller Williams. So Gary Keller wrote a book called The One Thing with co-author Jay Papasan, great guy. And in chapter 2 of that book, they talk about this idea of dominoes and the physics behind a domino, where if you push one domino over, when it hits the next domino, it has the physical force to push over a domino 50% larger than itself. And then that one will have the ability to push a domino 50% larger than itself. And there's this geometric progression where, you can take a little 1-inch domino, and after, 40 dominoes, it can push over like a 3-story building size domino, right? And after really my mentors, my wife, my business partners constantly telling me like, hey, Jess, we need you to focus. We need you to focus on one thing. And realizing that I had such a hard time with it because I love the Richard Bransons and the Elon Musks and, how many companies Warren Buffett owns. And so I knew that they weren't exactly right, that you can only do one thing with your life. But that principle, thinking like, oh, I can do all the dominoes, but I need to do them in order. And I need to do, like that book says, what's the one thing that will make everything else easier or irrelevant? And so I re-listened to that book and that chapter consistently, like I have it on my audible.com, and it's basically just on repeat. I've got a couple of YouTube videos that pop up automatically when I start YouTube on my computer, because it's just a philosophy that where my strength might be in making connections that other people don't make. The other side of that coin is shiny penny syndrome, jumping to the next thing before the last thing is done. And it's just a consistent reminder to stay on this one till I get this domino knocked over, then I'm allowed to do my next domino. So I heard a great quote last week. I wish I could remember who said it, but it was an acronym for focus. And it was like, it was just an idea of like following one course until success was the acronym. And I thought, Jess, you might need a tattoo of that, because that's probably one of the biggest missing things in your career. And I will say, like, I get offered all the time, do you want to be on this board of directors? Hey, do you want to own this company with me? I get repeated offers. And what I've started telling people is, the less things I do, the more money I make. So I'll think about it, but not until this one's done.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? The less things you do, the more money. Yeah, that's really interesting. No, I just want to see, the thing is that a person with varied interests, obviously, in a larger sense, manages to suck more out of life, right? Because you are doing multiple things, so that has its own advantage. But I think that's the domino story is a very interesting one, because that is probably the way you have been able to balance it, I guess, right? And you do, as I said, you do so many things. But now let me try and put you in a bit of a spot and ask you, what's your real passion? Like, what is it that what is the one thing that when you're doing that, you are like completely immersed, or you're in the flow, if I can use some colloquial terminologies, like at that particular point in time, everything else just is immaterial. What is that? What would be that one thing?
Yeah, I feel like there's a couple of questions there, so I'll maybe separate them. I can get in a flow state on quite a number of things. Art, snowboarding, funny enough, like writing a new course about Warren Buffett's investment philosophy, which has been a real rudder for me in life. Um, uh, but I do have to do things like put my phone on airplane mode and like maybe physically go to a location where nobody can come ask me, "Hey, Jess, I've just got one little thing to ask," and like get some solid time blocking. Um, uh, but but generally, it has to do with like inventing a new, exciting version of the future. That's a really easy one for me to get into a flow state. As far as my overarching passion, for the last 13, almost 14 years, I've been running a charity called Child Rescue Association that combats child trafficking. And so, besides my faith and my family, like ultimately, all these business things, all the parties, everything I get to go to, like those are so fun. But like deep down in my soul, like what it all funnels down into is I want to follow my heroes like Warren Buffett and Richard Branson, these guys who made very large amounts of money and committed to give at least half of it away. And the cause for me is helping make sure kids have a safe childhood.
Wow, that's really really special. And I think that would be fueling a lot of the stuff that you're doing, right? Like that's deep, right? That's coming from within. That's interesting. So now let's come back to a bit on what you've been doing, right? So if you look at the world of investing, right, and you been in the world of investing, you've invested on others' behalf also. You invested yourself as an entrepreneur, uh, and then you look at the world of entrepreneurship, right, which is doing, and they are slightly different, right? When investing is like you're putting money in somebody else, or you're putting money in a financial or a real estate asset, and you're hoping the asset appreciates, and therefore your money will appreciate. Entrepreneurship is yes, I mean, you want the company to appreciate, but you do it by doing like doing real stuff, right? Otherwise, the value of the company will not go up, right? And you can't really build a business. So if you look at these two as slightly separate, investing and entrepreneurship, how would what would be your take on these two things, considering that you've done both of them for such a long time?
Yeah, I could probably like bore you with about a 4-hour answer there. Let's get more specific because I do those kind of are like my twin passions, and I'm doing them so that I can afford to hire all these like Jason Bourne guys to help with child rescue. But like I do think about myself a little more like Warren Buffett, where he like, he picked the high profile people who knew what they're doing at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to do the work, but he was going to do the business investing to make the money. And where he says, I'm a better investor because I'm a businessman, and I'm a better businessman because I'm an investor.
I mean, right.
So I definitely have a lot to talk about of how they feed each other and how they interplay. Is there something specific there I could start with though?
Yeah, because I think okay, let's start with the fact, the qualities of a person, according to you, who would be a good investor vis-a-vis a good entrepreneur. Let's start there, like
Yeah.
from a skill set perspective.
Yeah, maybe the way to answer that is to just talk about the investors and entrepreneurs that I have the most appreciation for, that I look up to the most. When I look at investors, and I define it the way that Warren Buffett's mentor, Ben Graham, defines it, which is that for something to be an investment, you need safety of principal and an adequate return. So things like buying a gold bar or a raw piece of land or a cryptocurrency that doesn't create cash flow would be a speculation, according to Ben Gray. So when I term investing, I mean something that spits out cash flow so that it can be bought or sold as a multiple of the money it makes. Okay. And so leaving out the world of speculation, which maybe is a little closer to gambling than, say, compound interest investing, to me, the abilities of, like, again, when we talked about Warren Buffett and Ben Graham, but Warren Buffett's other mentors, Phil Fisher, who less people know, but his book Common Stocks, Uncommon Profits is just incredible. And Warren's partner, Charlie Munger, they really are the ones who swayed Warren to believe that it wasn't just getting a good deal that mattered in investing, that outperformance could happen by buying something that would have superior cash flows because it was an above average business for the long term. And so to me, when I look at those traits of an investor, you look at some of Warren Buffett's followers, like Bruce Flatt, that's gotten Brookfield to, I think, 700 billion right now, or I love Howard Marks, who got Oaktree to, I want to say, 185 billion right now. And their willingness to step outside their emotions and to look at analytically and say, very honestly, and this is something in short supply, is radical self-honesty in investing, in my observation, and to get to a place where they can look at the amount of future cash flows and the reliability of that amount of future cash flows, and make their decision about getting in to this business based on those two things instead of what they hope those two things would be, or what would be great if those two things would be. And the willingness to, I mean, there's quite a few things, but if you took those two elements and then Warren's principle of investing within your own circle of competence, I mean, those are some pretty good starts. But this idea of buying and selling things depending on what other people's opinion of it is going to be, like, everyone says that's going to be worth more later. To me, that's always so close to speculation versus fundamentally looking back at when I'm radically self-honest with myself, what are those future profits likely to be, and how reliable are those future profits? And then I'm just buying those future profits at a discount. So I don't know if that's helpful.
No, so that's I think a financial construct, right? From an investing perspective, and I think that makes sense. But let's just get one step deeper into this, right? So if you look at an investor as if you look at investing as a profession, right? People who want to look at, say, hey, I'm going to spend the next 35 years of my life just as an investor, right? And it could be any kind of asset class, the low risk to the high risk. For that person, would you say that having mathematical abilities is a big plus point, or what is that? What is
Sure.
that one or two things that that could possess?
Okay, I see where you're going with this. So I'll tell you what. Like, we raised a small fund. My partners and I raised like 27 million for a fund, and we made multi-million dollar investments off of an iPhone calculator. Like, math is like, you need to understand statistics and probabilities and basic multiplication, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. You do not need to know, like, again, I don't have any original thoughts, but as I parrot Warren Buffett here, you don't need equations with Greek letters in them. Okay? What Warren and his mentors and his partner and his followers will tell you is that the number one trait you need as an investor is emotional control. You need to, if you think about the market, right? Warren talks about it as, you need to think about the market like your waiter at a restaurant. The waiter is not there to tell you what you want to eat. The waiter is there to bring you what you decided you want to eat. And when people get confused, they lose a lot of money. And so if I know, I have a real estate fund, right? We're doing Airbnb resorts. If I know that if I was buying somebody else's like very unique Airbnb resort and I believed it was going to make $10 million a year, right? And I had told myself what I'm looking for is to make 10% per year on my money. Well, I know if they're willing to sell me that property at 100 million or less, I'm interested. Because at $100 million, I make my 10% per year on it. Like, let's leave out the debt and everything, okay? And it makes negotiations very simple because at $100 million and $1, I'm no longer interested. And this is why Warren Buffett is such an unemotional mergers and acquisitions guy. Unlike, so I used to be on an M&A team for Citi, okay? M&A is typically very emotional.
Very.
But, Warren Buffett, like you can read all the histories on him, you can listen to all his talks. He does not fluctuate much. Like it's not a lot of negotiating back and forth. Like it's like a few cents here and there, but like they're not swings in his negotiating offers because he knows what that company is worth to him. And either you're willing to sell it to him that price or cheaper, or you're not. And it's a very simple thing. But he says the ability to not get caught up in the emotion and want to buy it even though they're changing the price. The ability to think rationally about future cash flows of a business in the middle of 2008, in the middle of the dot-com bubble, in the middle of everyone else losing their mind and getting so fearful. This thing about emotional control, he says, is the ability to not let everyone else's emotions become contagious and to instead think for yourself. And Howard Marks will say that, and all of those guys who are, the world's best value investors, compound interest investors, will say to you, you need to think for yourself. And it's incredibly hard because humans like to be like each other.
Yeah, the social construct, right? That's interesting. So would it be fair to say that balance, right? Like if I were to try and summarize, the last 2 or 3 minutes, would it be fair to say that for a person to be like an ace investor, right? Balance would be the key, right? You don't want to get swayed too much on either side. Like you don't want to be very, very fearful, as you rightly said, when the market is fearful. And you don't want to be like overly optimistic when the market is like just, going through the roof. Right. So would that be a fair comment, or would it be something else? Like if you were to distill everything into one word or one sentence, I know it's slightly hard, but just wanted to give that a shot.
Yeah, I think balance is a very critical part of emotional control. My partners and I started to give ourselves a minimum 24-hour vesting period on all decisions and sleep on it and try and flush our emotions. We did. Because if we could not get swayed by the highs or get swayed by the lows, and instead, keep that equanimity. One of the other books that's on complete repeat on my podcast, on my audible.com on my phone that I listen to almost daily is "The Obstacle is the Way" by Ryan Holiday. It's all about taking Stoic wisdom from 2,500 years ago and putting stories from the last 200 years on it, and just, he goes through example after example of people who didn't let their situation dictate their emotions and dictate their actions, that independent of their situation, good or bad, they decided that they were going to be in charge of their own emotions, which then drastically helped them make decisions they'd be proud of for the long term. And so I think that kind of balance is incredibly helpful for the kind of emotional control that you need to have to be a superior investor.
I think that was very useful. Now let's switch tracks a bit and let's talk about being an entrepreneur, right? And now being an entrepreneur, and of course, both of us are in the same boat on this one, right? And it has its balance. It need not be sometimes it's difficult to have balance, and maybe balance is not only the trait you need, because entrepreneurs need to show passion. They need to show emotion, right? Otherwise, how will you build a team, especially when you're starting from scratch, right? Unless people see that emotion and passion in you, nobody's going to join you, right? And if nobody's going to join you, then you pretty much can't build a company, right? Because that's the basic building block, right? So, and then, as you start building, again, there will be a lot of highs and definitely a lot of lows, and maybe the lows would be more than the highs, especially in the early stages, right? so for an entrepreneur, how does it work? Right? And according to you, what are those traits that the entrepreneur needs to, have in order to be successful?
In many ways, they're related. This ability to control your emotions and think for yourself, I think, are very key. I look at the people that I look up to the most, or on the podcast. Out of those, I think it's 840-ish episodes so far, right? The people who have built the biggest businesses. So Steve Blank built an $8 billion business. Chip Wilson built Lululemon to $47 billion. Fred Vicola got Casera to $22 billion. I had the billionaire Jeff Hoffman on, who was on the founding team of Priceline that went to $100 billion. Last week, I had a great guy from Bangalore, India, named Jay Sidhu, who took a bank that had $500 million in assets and grew it to $90 billion, right? And all of those folks, more so than the guys who built $100 billion businesses or businesses in the tens of millions, they are incredible listeners. I'm shocked with their humility. They are so obsessed about their product or their service being the puzzle piece that fits perfectly into the hole in their customer's puzzle. And what they are so much better at than me or the other investors, the other smaller entrepreneurs that I've interviewed, is I think most of us have at least what I suffer from, which is a bit of ego of like wanting to be right. Like I have my insecurities about, do I know what I'm doing or not? And so then I want everyone else to agree with me, so then I can feel less unstable with the fact that like we're doing something unstable, starting a business, right? And these guys, they listen so deeply for what they had wrong. They're so worried about what they have wrong with the product, not what they have right, so they can go back and fix it. And they observe so intently, what do people do instead of what they say? And then they go off and think really, really hard. And they think about what people didn't say. And they are looking all across different industries that have nothing to do with themselves for innovative ideas or something they can steal from another industry, but connect these dots that other people don't connect. I heard this definition of technology that technology is something that is hard to do that people want. And that's why it's technology. Yeah. Because by the time it becomes easy, people don't think about it as tech anymore. And so you think about this hole in their life, this puzzle piece, and making it easy, whether that's easy because it's fast, easy because it's cheap, easy because whatever the reason is, but like lowering what they have to output to get that hole filled. And it could be they've got a problem in life. It could be they just need entertainment, or they just need to have inspiration in life, right? But to me, that deep, deep humility to listen, combined with what would the other side of the coin of like a deep confidence to be able to be the first one to connect dots that nobody else has connected, and to go out on a limb and say these dots connect, even though nobody else realized it yet. Those are a couple things for me.
I think that's very, very interesting. I think the listening part is something which is very interesting, because what I have been observing with a lot of people that I have met over the last 2 decades who have started companies and built them fairly large is that inherently they are curious, right? They want to know stuff, right? So they ask a lot of questions. And as you rightly said, they listen, right? So when I'm asking you a question, obviously I'm curious to know what your response is, right? And they respect people who know something about one thing. Like, if you have specific knowledge, then they respect because they want to learn, right? And these are people, as you rightly said, these are people who say that I don't know everything, right? And it's okay. I'm not supposed to. Nobody does. But I want to learn, right? And they are constantly learning, right? So I think your listening, that's a great point, right? Very, very, bang on that one.
One other thing I'm going to add in there is, like for me, if you look at the difference between job people, and specifically like the further out away from entrepreneurship would be maybe like a government employee or somebody where their salary is almost guaranteed, right? Um, Another one is in great entrepreneurs, I see a focus on risk minimization instead of risk avoidance. Like with bad entrepreneurs, you see that they're seeking risk. I want to take a big risk because it's the rush, right? Where the great entrepreneurs, they're willing to take the risk, but they're constantly looking how to minimize it. Where the folks who aren't great entrepreneurs or who are maybe just further the opposite direction employees, I see them wanting to avoid risk at all costs. Where like, I look at you, Gautam, and you built these multiple businesses and you're like operating in different countries and like you're an adventurer. And I think that is extremely helpful for anybody, is being willing to become an adventurer while pairing with it. How do I avoid unnecessary risk on this adventure? But I actually want to change this. Take the same question back to you. You're a great entrepreneur, and I know that you've met incredible entrepreneurs over your lifetime. What do you think is a couple of the key traits for an entrepreneur?
You know what? I think the thing which has fascinated me the most are the study of explorers, right? People who went out to the sea, maybe 250, 450 years ago, right? Even before they realized the earth was round, right? Imagine, and of course, the motives were commercial. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's not altruistic, but it was commercial. That's fine. But the fact that you can take a ship, right, and just go out into the sea, right? I mean, to me, those are the real entrepreneurs. I mean, they took risks which were like almost unimaginable, right? You don't even know whether you might have just fall off. I mean, I don't know what they were thinking, right? I mean, they were like, hey, the earth is flat and maybe I reach the end of the earth and then I'll fall into space. Who knew? I mean, how do you know what people were thinking, right? 500 years ago, right?
One of the things that about that story, let's talk specifically Christopher Columbus, right? Talking about tying dots together that the rest of the humans hadn't really. Most of the people on land thought about land as flat, which by definition is 99.9% of the humans, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've ever heard the story, but one of the ways that clinched it for him to get the money from his investors, which is the country of Spain, the royal family in Spain, was this concept that the world was round was not the accepted wisdom. That was not how people thought. And the story, as far as I heard it, is the thing that clinched them was going to the ocean and showing them that the mast of a ship becomes visible first before the rest of the ship.
Before the rest of the ship. Yeah, this is very interesting. I've read about this one.
And so his conviction about that, he was able to make his conviction contagious enough to get a crew to go with him, to the team, to get the investors to get on board, at least with their money, right? And it's that tying the uncommon dots together and having the conviction to do what wasn't accepted wisdom is the reason that we can name almost nobody from those years. Like everyone, the other millions of people on Earth at that time all died. None of us can remember their names. And we've all heard of Christopher Columbus.
Correct. And if you look at Columbus and Magellan, there are others, right? Circumvented the Earth. According to me, these guys are the real entrepreneurs. Like they took the risk. As you rightly said, they minimized it. They were not rushing towards risk. I'm sure they had some calculations, as the story of Columbus tells us. Some calculations worked out, right? But that's, to me, that's one thing which has always been fascinating, right? The other one on the entrepreneurship story, and I'm going to say, and then I'm going to put the question back to you, is original thought, right? I think original thought, as you rightly said, like people who have the conviction, or in your example, the people who can connect the dots and come up with something which others have not thought of, right? And then have the conviction to back it, right? Saying, hey, I believe, right, that this is possible, right? And then, you go forward from that belief, right? That's the other part, right? If you can really have that kind of skill, right? And that kind of way of thinking, then according to me, you will become a great entrepreneur at some point of time, right? Because the original thought is something which is it's not easy. Original thinking is never easy, right? As you rightly said, we are used to social constructs, so we end up following, right? It affects us, right? What we read, what we talk about, people whom we interact with, right? Naturally, we are inclined to follow. But to come up with original thought is something which is really, really rare. And those are the ones who really go on to become great entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
What's your take on that?
I totally agree. I mean, I look at when we were first becoming friends and I was learning about your company, Cbrex, I assumed that what you were talking about is reaching out to American companies and helping them get staff in India, because that's in my world. That's my flat earth. Like
Yeah.
that's doing like that makes sense to me. I get it. Business people I look up to agree that that's a good idea. Right? And I don't know if you're like the original guy that ever thought this up, but it was original to me. And you just connected the dots. You're like, Jess, no, like I'm helping a company in New York hire employees in New York to work in New York. It's just we're going to pay that recruiter, like that company can pay the recruiter half or a third of what they would normally pay, because the people doing the Google searching and doing the resume building don't necessarily need to live in New York with those prices. They could be all sorts of different places in the world. And it was just like this like click that happened. I was like, oh my gosh, that's genius. And it was completely outside of my paradigm of thinking about having somebody in the Philippines or India or somewhere else. Finding a New York employee for a New York company to work in New York, I just never considered it. And as soon as you said it, it was just like the logic was very clear for me. But that was an original thought. And like, if I was becoming a client, I'm sure I'd be wanting to do other things, researching to ensure that these folks in the other country really know what to look for, what's the success rate, or like I'm sure there'd be like I need to build a little more trust before I'm forking over my cash. But the idea of the term entrepreneurship, I guess the first time it was in writing was this French guy who I wish I could remember his name. I want to say in the late 1700s, and it was this concept of describing a person who can take a resource of a lower value and upgrade it to being of a higher value. And I mean, it's just so clear. Like if you have these recruiters who might have been doing their job for 20, 30 years that have become experts at aspects of it, but they've been limited to the kind of companies in their country and the kind of candidates in their country, it probably limited their income. And now the ability that you've given them to be able to help somebody in like pick one of the most expensive cities in the world, like a New York or a London or something, right? Like that is taking an existing resource, somebody who built 20 years learning how to recruit folks. Maybe they need to add a little bit of working with Americans or working with Brits or something like this. But like, that's just so obvious dot connecting for me that anyways, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. No, it's like the other thing which is very, very interesting, right? From some of our discussion that we've been having in the last 20-25 minutes, is that if you look at people who don't become entrepreneurs, right, and they do a job, right, and they really like what they're doing, right. I think that also, in my mind, entrepreneurship, I would also call them entrepreneurs in some fashion, because I think key to entrepreneurship, apart from a lot of the things that we discussed, is that you have to love what you do, right? You really have to, and I'm using the word love, not like, right? Because like is very weak, right? I think people who love what they do, even though they may not be an entrepreneur in the traditional sense, like they wouldn't have started their own company. Uh, in my mind, are still entrepreneurs because they are happy, right? And they're doing something which is fulfilling for them. And I think end of the day, that's super important, right? We can talk investing, entrepreneurship, we can talk lots of stuff, but if what you do is not fulfilling, right, then you really have a problem, right? So I think that would be the other way I would look at it, right? Like entrepreneurship is about loving what you're doing, Because entrepreneurs love what they do. I don't think there's any entrepreneur in the world, who would say, "Hey, I hate what I." I mean, that doesn't. I mean, I don't. I have never heard it. Right? It doesn't make any sense. So that would be one other way of looking at entrepreneurship. What's your take on that? I mean, you of course love what you do, and you a couple of things. But what's your take on this particular line of thought?
Yeah, I love it on a whole because I hate certain parts of it, you know? And to me, there's a spectrum both within starting and owning businesses and within being an employee of more entrepreneurial or less entrepreneurial. And, my mom was a nurse. My dad worked for the provincial government in Western Canada, the provincial government of Alberta, right? Not entrepreneurial ventures in the sense of they weren't increasing revenue. They weren't innovating new service lines. They weren't doing those kind of aspects. But received tons of fulfillment for it, and we're happy. And I think that is great. I think my mom would have hated doing what I've done with my career because she's hated that I've even done it because my stress, she's my mom, loves me, and she feels my stress. Like she's so worried for me that me being an entrepreneur stresses her out, let alone her being an entrepreneur, right? She is not interested in the roller coaster. We've had big highs and major crashes, and that's been tough on her as a mother. And I don't think that she would have enjoyed that, and I don't think she needs to, right? But you look within businesses and let's take even within government bureaucracies, right? There are absolutely people who just push the button, do what they're told, punch the clock. Maybe they're an accountant, right? And they're an auditor of a different government agency, and they show up and they get their job done and they do it with excellence. And they're like my sister, who's a CPA, starting to get her CPA right now. And for her, like when she finishes accounting, it's like she just finished a puzzle. Like she gets an endorphin release because all the numbers worked the way they were supposed to. She has a sense of accomplishment. It drives me insane. I'm like, we already made the money. Why do we have to count it again? Right? And we're different, and that's totally okay. But my dad, the government employee, he was highly creative, and he did things like there was a religious group that had moved over from Germany, the Mennonites, to southern Alberta, Canada, and they spoke German, not English, poor English, and they were not very employable. So they were on government assistance, kind of like welfare, right? And there was a college in Lethbridge, Alberta, that was trying to get more students. And there was a new mining company that had moved out to kind of a remote area of Alberta, and they didn't have enough workers. And it was very hard to attract workers out to the middle of nowhere, kind of near where these Mennonites were living. And my dad, the government employee, right, he arranged to get grants for the university to be able to give training to the Mennonites for free so they could run the mining equipment. The mining company could have local trained employees. And to me, that's highly entrepreneurial within a government agency. And again, in entrepreneurship, like I talked to my buddy yesterday. He's got 6 stores of this great cookie company out here called Crumble Cookies. They're like a big, giant, delicious cookie and it's a franchise. And he's got 6 of those stores, but he didn't have to invent the branding. He didn't have to come up with the initial investors. He didn't have to, try to make an entire business just out of one thing, a cookie, right? Like he wasn't on that side of entrepreneurial, like him now duplicating the model and owning 6 franchise locations is arguably less entrepreneurial than Elon Musk inventing the EV space as we know it, or some of the things that he's done where he's much more of the explorer. I love the book by Jim Collins, Great by Choice, his follow-up to Good to Great, where he contrasts Shackleton and Amundsen, who are in the race to get to the South Pole first, and all of the crazy things and the risk and the having to tie dots together and risk minimization. It's interesting to look at what one of the teams did to try and make that trip less likely to end in death. So I know it's kind of a long answer, but I guess to sum it up, I feel like there's a real spectrum of entrepreneurial approaches, higher entrepreneurship level, lower entrepreneurship level, both within business ownership or employment.
Correct. So let's switch tracks a bit and let's talk about your podcast series. And I know that's like a passion, it's an interest, it's like something which you've been doing for a very, very long time and have really evolved it to a different level now. So if you look at, and you, as you said, you've done more than 800 of those, right? If you look at, you know, look at the series, uh, what would be the one thing or two things, if one is too difficult to pinpoint, that you have learned, right? After having spoken to so many people from various walks of life, sports people, business people, investors, right? Film stars. I'm sure, and I'm sure there'll be many learnings. But if you were to summarize one or two for our listeners, what would that be, Jess?
Yeah, here's a couple of them. The first one is that there's no special people. There's just people. I watch the movies and I think like the Jason Bourne guys are amazing. And then I have actual Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, CIA case officers on the show. And they have worked incredibly hard at mastering their skill set. And they have probably come to it with some natural aptitudes. And they're just people. And, I've had maybe 40 or so guys who have built businesses over the $1 billion mark on the show, and other female entrepreneurs who've grown very, very large businesses. And they probably had some aptitude. And then they doubled down really hard, and they were willing to pay the price to achieve mastery and uncommon insight. And those are learnable skills. And if that many other people have built multi-billion-dollar businesses, you can too. Anybody listening to this, if you're willing to research and practice the kind of patterns that show up as successful for all those different kinds of folks, there's a very high likelihood that you can achieve something similar to them. And, movie stars, stand-up comedians, Olympians, like the people that the media has maybe subtly tried to suggest to me are different than me, are not. They're just a person too. And that sounds cliche and dumb. And I don't know why I need to interview over 800 people to really get that in my bones. But it's very optimism producing, both for myself and everyone around me, to realize any of us that are willing to do the hard work of discovering the 80-20 principle, the very few things that make the biggest difference, and then to practice those outside the comfort zone with a scoreboard to know how well we're doing, that there's a pretty good probability that most of us can learn about most things. So there's that aspect. And then, again, this is going to sound cliche and dumb, but that I'm not as smart as I think I am. That's another one. That with all the, I've read, maybe, if you don't count all my Jason Bourne books, maybe 900 or so books I've listened to on Audible, business, investing, marketing, philosophy, and some of those 10 and 20 times or more. And all the interviews and the businesses and being an investment fund manager and all this stuff. And when I get to spend time, let's just take the sport of business or investing. When I get to spend time with investors who have created hundreds of millions of dollars in their personal net worth through their investing, or the billionaire entrepreneurs, I have become much less interested in how smart I am, and much more interested in what duplicatable pattern could I or anybody else apply, such as shut up and listen, Jess, such as shut up and observe, such as shut up and go somewhere where no one can talk to me, and think really hard and assume that the easy answers aren't good enough. And that even though what any business needs is simplicity, it's simplicity on the other side of complexity. And that I have to listen, study, observe, and get through the complexity to the other side of the thing that was just simply the puzzle piece missing in a customer's life.
Wow. That's really nice, Jess. I think that's very inspiring. I think a lot of people listening would be hopefully, reaching for some idea that they have in their head, because a lot of people do have ideas, but for a lack of will or lack of risk taking, they don't do it, right? But yeah, sorry, you want to say something here?
Yeah, can I add one more? Because
Yeah, please.
I just love the biggest, the mostest, the fastest, like the fastest car, the fastest airplane, the biggest building, I'm just fascinated by the mostest. Okay.
Mm.
And I thought meeting these people was going to be how I found out the secret of the different kind of person, the billionaires, the movie stars. I thought that's what was going to happen. And it was the reverse that happened of finding out, oh no, they're just people. But which was wildly inspiring when you realize, well, I'm just a person. Hold on. So those big crazy dreams that I'm like almost too timid to even dream, those, like, it's just regular people that got those because we're all just regular people. Like it's wildly inspiring for me. One other principle that maybe I will say is, I mentioned Good to Great, Jim Collins, right? Many people will remember from that book where he talks about the hedgehog. He says that, I think it's Aesop says, the fox knows many tricks and the hedgehog knows one. Curl up in a ball and hold the spike so this fox can't eat me, right? Mm. But he knows it so well that he stays alive, right? Over and over, let's just use the billionaires. They will have some central principle that they live so much harder than you think they would. Eric Yuan from Zoom, I think he's got Zoom to 17 billion or something right now, right? He is, amongst his many skills and talents, in my opinion, the number one customer service CEO on earth that I know about. His obsession with customer service is inspiring. He got to 140,000 users with no marketing because he was obsessed with the experience of what it was like to use Zoom. This is long before the pandemic. And when people would quit Zoom, he would email them personally and say, I'm so sorry to see you go. I'm the CEO. I'm sad you don't want to say more. And they'd write back, this is a funny bot. Thanks for the email. And he'd be like, no, this is really me. Do you want to hop on a Zoom right now? And he would personally get on Zooms with all these people quitting, and he would win them back all the time. And that reputation made Zoom the way it was. And so I wasn't surprised when Zoom won the pandemic. Steve Blank, 20-year professor at Stanford, built 8 businesses before that. His 8th one he sold for $8 billion. Okay. And the depth that he believes in customer discovery, which is this idea of like, don't make a product and shove it down people's throats. Go really, really understand your customer and then make the product for them and bring the unique insight to the hole in their puzzle, right? He's like, all of my friends read The Lean Startup, where Eric Ries talks about his professor, Steve Blank, okay? And all of us have heard of iteration and customer discovery in business, right? But when you take Steve Blank's class at Stanford or he teaches at Berkeley, in 10 weeks, he makes you go interview 100 potential customers, not hypothetically, like an actual 100, before you're even coming up with the product. You have to interview 10 in 10 weeks. I'm like, holy cow. All of my friends think they do customer discovery. I don't think any of them did an actual 100 interviews. And I'm listening further into the interview and he says, except for my companies, Jess, when I was doing it for me, I would do 300.
No.
No wonder he ends up with an $8 billion business. He really understands what's missing in that customer's life, right? So this idea of, the most influential book in my career out of those 900 business books is The 80-20 Principle by Richard Koch, self-made billionaire in the UK. I had him on the show. I was a complete fanboy. I was like falling all over myself. It's like a 13-year-old girl at a boy band concert or something, okay? Yeah. And it was fascinating to me that I'd read 80-20 Principle at least 20 times by that. I'd read all his other books that were on Audible. And I was sure that, like, now that I've got him on the show, he's gonna tell me the one special part that he hasn't told everyone else, that's not in the books. That's not, in all the podcasts of his I've ever listened to, right? Nope. There was nothing new. It was a huge letdown in the sense of there's like no other secret he hasn't shared with us. But the surprisingly dull and amazingly inspirational secret is his extreme commitment to sorting through almost everything in life that doesn't make much of a difference so that he can put all of his energy into the domino that makes all the difference. And he just lives 80-20 harder than the rest of us. He sold after BCG, went to Bain and then started LEK Consulting. I think he sold the stake for like $5 million. And I saw on Perry Marshall's website, he's turned that $5 million into $1.4 billion, working, I think, like an average of an hour a day. And it's
Wow.
because he lives his principle harder than most of us live our principle.
Yeah. No, I think they're learning that they are just people, right? And the fact that there is no secret ingredient, right? I mean, as you rightly said, and and that actually there is no secret, right? It's pretty much out in the open, and anybody can pick it up and run with it, right? The problem is that most people don't, right? Not that it's difficult, it's not,
Yeah.
and it's
I
not that
know
you have to read 50,000 books to get it, right? You don't, right?
I'm just a slow learner. That's why I had to listen to all those books and do all those interviews to find out something probably everyone listening is like, that's pretty obvious, Jess.
Yeah.
Maybe one last thing that I will bring up.
Mm.
Warren Buffett talks about he wants a business where the castle has a big wall around it and a deep moat. Richard Koch from the 80-20 principle says the most important thing you can do is be valuably different, right? There's these great books, Play Bigger, Differentiate or Die, Blue Ocean Strategy, Different by Young Mi Moon. This idea of, can you have something highly valuable and scarce that is defendable is a pretty good recipe for making a bunch of money.
Yeah, that's true. Now, and we are almost hitting time, but I still want to ask you about one thing which, I was very keen to know is about your reading habit. And I know that you listen to books and you also read and you listen. So are you carving out time on a daily basis? Like, do you have on your calendar a block time saying, hey, this is time to read? Or is it like something, how have you managed to build that into your, like a daily routine?
Yeah, so I have to out myself here. I typically read less than one book per year, and I typically listen to maybe 2 to 4 books per week. Okay, and I would have to carve time. I would have to set aside time to sit down and read, because that's time I could be with my family. That's time I could be working, and my go nature, I would have to set time aside, which is funny because I actually really enjoy quietly reading a book, physical book. But for listening, I've trained myself to just listen faster and faster over time. So on Audible right now, I'm at 3.5 speed because that's the most it'll do. Where like on YouTube, when I'm listening to like a keynote speech, sometimes I can get up to maybe, my max right now is maybe 5 times before it's just, before my brain can't play catch up. But if they have an accent, if they're talking fast, like these things I'll have to lower the speeds, right? But so it becomes much less impressive when you realize that I'm listening to those couple of books a week or whatever at 3.5 speed. But no, I've trained myself to use the cracks of my day. So commuting, doing the dishes, working in the yard. When I have 5 minutes because I'm waiting for my prescription at the pharmacy, I'll flip on a book, because I can get through over 15 minutes of a book, right? 17.5 minutes of a book in 5 minutes because I'm listening at 3.5 speed. And so it's actually quite rewarding to, like, I get a little bit of a high out of knowledge acquisition, right? Like if I get a secret or if I can remember something, like that's why I used to be on a kick of how many books can I listen to? And then one of my heroes, Ryan Holiday, said, why aren't we reading the best books more instead of every book? And so even though I listen to a lot of new books, I'm much more in the last handful of years, much more on the repeat of like, I listen to a book once to see if it's any good. And then I file it in my brain of like, when I have that problem, I need to break that book out. And then the very best books, the 80-20 principle, the one thing, the obstacle is the way, there's a few different Warren Buffett books that I go back to over and over. I'm trying to ingrain them in myself through repetitions. So just like mastery comes from knowing what skill you're practicing outside of the comfort zone repeatedly, and having a scoreboard to know whether you're doing it right or not. There's 2 ways, as far as my research says, to get things into long-term memory. It's either have them associated with a highly emotional event, like a car accident or something, right? You're not going to forget that, or through repetitions. And so these very wise people, I try to listen to their books over and over because I'm trying to get the repetitions to get it into my long-term memory and help it become the default lens that I'm looking at the world through.
Wow, that was really helpful. Jess, I think we have hit time and we are coming to the end of the show. Thanks a lot. I think I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you did. And I'm sure that our listeners will learn a lot from what you have shared. Thank you, Jess.
Oh, this is so fun. Thank you for having me.